Well, good evening, everyone. This is Sarah's Night. Of course, those of you who are my few but precious subscribers, you probably know that well already. Um, for those of you who have been following along in this book series about a vampire rabbit named Bunnicula and his adventures with the American middle-class family, the Monroes, and in particular their three pets, Chester, Harold, and Howie. I kind of wanted to talk about what this book in particular, Nighty-Nightmare. I mean, you can see the original cover for this book on the video right here. I wanted to talk about what this particular book meant to me, and I don't have anything really planned out to say. Just kind of so it's probably going to be pretty aimless. But in particular, I want to talk about the memory I have of this book being first given to me as a gift. It was brought to me by my maternal grandmother Dolores when I was just 7 years old in the second grade. I think it was late in the school year, probably March or April, or even May. Which the month of May has a significance in this story, actually. So, she brought it from Chattanooga, Tennessee, where my family and I had just moved away from. I think before my second grade year. So it was when I just now turned 7. And she brought it with her when she came on probably her first visit since we moved away to our house in South Carolina. Of course, being little kids, my sister and I had we were still getting used to a new life. This is the first time we'd ever moved, at least out of state and away from all of our other known family. In fact, to this day, most of my family still lives in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it's where my sister and I were born. And it's just, I guess it's so precious to me. One, because my maternal grandparents, both of them, but especially Dolores, my grandmother, she and my grandfather always spoiled my sister and I like crazy. And it was their way of showing love, just like with all grandparents. And thankfully, I don't think they spoiled us to like a destructive degree where we just grew up like horrible people or something, expecting the world to bow down to us. But it was kind of the one thing that when my maternal grandmother Dolores finally died about 10 years ago, that was the one thing everybody said of her, that no matter what her other character traits were, she definitely loved her grandchildren, And I admit it seemed as if, no disrespect intended, she didn't do much else with her life. She was a mediocre housekeeper, really, and she never worked. Not to my knowledge, especially since I was born, up to the day of her death. But it was like she put all of her concentration on spoiling her grandkids. There's 4 of us, my sister and I, and my 2 cousins. So this book was just another gift to hers. And the second thing about it is, what makes it so precious is, I don't know why. It must have been an act of God, that compelled her to bring this particular book to me, because it's the first real book I ever read. I think I already liked reading as a child, but this made me grow to love it. And before Nighty-Nightmare, I don't remember ever reading a book of any kind of substantial length. Even for a kid's book, just anything more than just like picture books, books that are more text than pictures, and you kind of read it, you kind of get through quickly before bedtime, that kind of thing. this was like the first, real big book, at least in terms of, how a kid would think of this. First big book I ever read. And I also don't know what compelled her to bring this particular one to me, because I'm guessing from the look of the animals on the cover, that must have been it. Now that I think about it, she might have thought, oh, a book where animals are the characters, obviously, so we'll like that because he loves animals so much. When I from 4 years old up until midway through college, I wanted to be a veterinarian, so I had a love for animals back then as a child. So that might have been it. But I'm thinking about the title Nighty-Nightmare. For a kid, this actually seemed like kind of a horror-based book. I know it's silly to think of it that way, especially now. But I guess the illustrations, especially, if you hadn't noticed the illustrations of previous Bunnicula books and in this one, and the atmosphere, even though of course no harm truly comes to anyone, the kind of one of the main focuses of horror, what makes you feel horror for the characters in a story is if they are in genuine danger. It was just somehow this book was a little bit of a scary experience for me, and pretty much all the Bunnicula books were, until I grew up, a little bit more. But I became such a fan of the Bunnicula books instantly after this. I immediately sought out more, and again, it's thanks to Dolores, my grandmother. I ended up loving this book so much, and I wanted to read more. The Bunnicula books in particular, I must have read all the ones, all 5 of them that were out at the time. There are 7 now. The latter 2 James Howe wrote since the turn of the millennium, actually. Like, he returned to writing more Bunnicula books. But the first 5 of them were all out by then, pretty much. And I must have sought out all of them in the next year or two, for trying to find them at the school sponsored book fairs, and the few times that I got to go to the bookstore with some money my parents had given me, at the mall or something like that, I would look for them. But again, because of it was so weird how she thought I would like this book in the first place, because of the kind of, at least to a 7-year-old, again, I was only 7 at the time, this looked like a scary book, kind of. And why she would think I would have any desire to, have anything to do with horror of any kind, it was, I was real averse to horror as a kid, because I always associated horror with blood and murder, people dying, and graphically so. But it was that was probably due to I know it was I was, this was due to a scene I had seen from that 80s comedy movie Summer School, where Mark Harmon is the substitute teacher, right? And or not substitute teacher, he was like a PE teacher, and he got stuck teaching summer school, like remedial English, to a bunch of misfit kids. And, over the course of the movie, he inspires them, of course, to be better. But there's this one out of place scene, of course, it's funny now as an adult. I look at him like, haha, man, those kids are so retarded. There's this one scene where, the kids in his class, in order to win Mark Harmon back, because he quit on them suddenly when they pissed him off, to win him back, they pulled like a prank involving a lot of creature makeup and I guess red food coloring or something to make it look like they all died in horrible ways at the hands of like a guy like a Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and a combination of that and Jeffrey Dahmer, maybe, I don't know, or John Wayne Gacy. They kind of propped themselves up to make the classroom look like, this ridiculously over the top murder scene to scare off like the substitute who was coming to replace Mark Harmon, and they, scared her off, or got her fed up when she realized it was all a joke, and she quit. She quit on them, so that enabled them to bring back the old teacher, Mark Harmon. So it's a good movie now that I think about it. I know I'm babbling here, but I'm just trying to think. Again, I'm trying to explain like the origins of this book and why my grandmother thought I would like it when she first brought it to me. But if I may say, as an aside, as an adult, as a 4-year-old when I first saw it, I had no idea what was going on. So that scene totally, traumatized me. It made me very averse to horror because I could only associate it with like blood and killing. So, of course, horror means so much more than that, or it definitely should. I'm actually kind of I kind of consider myself, especially because of my affinity for survival horror video games, I kind of consider myself a master of horror now. I enjoy having an atmosphere built up where I believe I'm in danger and I'm fighting all sorts of monsters and specters and scary apparitions. It's kind of like a test of my own bravery. I've probably mentioned this before in LPs or something, how I came to be such a fan of horror despite my my bad first date with it. First off on the wrong foot with that movie Summer School, at 4 years old. So, but it's a good movie. So again, I actually recommend you see it as an adult. It's like a good comedy experience, pretty classic. So most of you probably even know it if you're around the same age I am. You were born in the 80s. But anyway, so whenever, pretty much from 4 to 11, 12 years old, I was very averse to any kind of horror. And for example, I can think of during the time we lived in South Carolina, from 7 to 12 years old, I remember my sister and my father were kind of big fans of slasher movies. So they were always like, like almost every weekend they were going down the video store, seeing what they could find. They'd pop into the VCR in the den, so that meant I had to make myself scarce for the next 2 hours or something because I couldn't stand to see it. All because of my first experience with any kind of scenes of blood and gore. Even though, of course, in the case of Summer School, it was all just a stupid joke. Nobody was really hurt or dead. So, so at the time when my grandmother brings this book to me, I'm thinking like, why would she think that I would want something like that? But she convinced me to sit down with her and read it, and this is my particularly precious memory. And I'm actually starting to feel emotions come on as I say this, and I'm sorry about that, guys, so please excuse me, but when she brought this book to me, I don't think I was fully averse to reading it. It just seemed like a daunting experience. Probably not even because of the seeming, this might be a scary book, simply because of the title and to a 7-year-old, the picture of all these animals on the front. Even if we're talking about animal characters here, they seem to be in the middle of like a twisted setting in the woods at midnight, in the dark of night, and they all look like they're at least nervous or worried, just any kind of negative emotions, like something is out to get them. And of course, that's what Chester, in this book, for those of you who've been reading the books along with me so far, what kind of character Chester is and how he kind of tends to see, evil everywhere when it's just a series of silly coincidences or, there's nothing really there at all. But of course, I didn't know that at the time. It may not have even been that aspect, now that I think about that, made me reluctant to sit down and read this. But nevertheless, I was outwardly grateful to my grandmother. I was like, oh, a book, thank you. I think that the daunting aspect was actually sitting down and reading a book like this, all on my own. Again, for my age, 150 page or so book that, takes... would only take like an hour and a half to 2 hours for me as an adult to read now, but just, getting into really reading well, and probably a lot of kids my age wouldn't be able to read a book like this at all, really. And hey, I had trouble getting through it too, I'm not going to lie. But it was the fact that my grandmother, Dolores, sat down with me. She said, "Let's read through this together." And we chose a spot in the living room, closed the shutter doors to the room from the rest of the house so that, we wouldn't be bothered by a lot of noise or anything. From like the rest of the family and elsewhere in the house. And we've read through this together this was during probably her first visit to us, from Chattanooga to our house, since we moved from Chattanooga to South Carolina. I mean, and since then, up into, for the next 5 years while we lived in South Carolina, she visited us constantly because, again, she loved spoiling us. My grandfather couldn't be there near as often because, of course, at that time he still worked. This was before he retired, so he couldn't just, get away for the weekend so easily or whatever. And I think we got through this entire book on the first visit, and it was just, we took turns reading each chapter. It's like my grandmother went first just to kind of show me, it's not so bad. She read the first chapter to me, and I guess it was kind of get me warmed up to trying to read out loud for myself, and it was just this memory I have with my grandmother, and this wasn't the only book. It was her idea in the beginning. This is how it got started. But reading in the living room together, especially Bunnicula books, were kind of became a tradition over the next few years. I think I even sat in her lap while reading Nighty-Nightmare. 7 years old, I still felt like I didn't feel like, like I had to be such a big kid that I couldn't sit in my grandmother's lap anymore. It's one of many precious memories, but among the most precious I have of my grandmother, because I'm talking about it now because every now and then I think back to how she died 10 years ago. I guess for a guy to make it to his 20s before the first grandparent even dies, I've lost them all now. My paternal grandmother was the last to go about 2 years ago. So, I mean, I guess I'm really lucky in that regard to have lived as long as I did before losing all my grandparents. But, every now and then I think back because of my evolved beliefs as a Christian. I don't believe in that everybody has some inherently immortal part of them, a soul that lives forever no matter what, such that death, is just a step into the afterlife, I think of death in so much more a pensive, depressing way, I guess, because I believe, even as a Christian, I believe that when you're dead, you're dead. It's the end. When you're dead, you're in the grave, and that's the real you. And it's as though you're not awake, you're not conscious in any way. And that, immortality, a life forever in heaven with God, is only something that only believers will be able to achieve at a later date. I don't think it's an inherent part, where you have an immediate afterlife. And as for the rest who don't believe, well, they're dead forever. They're gone. They're absolutely out of the picture. I don't believe in, this conscious heaven or conscious hell immediately after death. So when I saw my grandmother be taken away by that damned Alzheimer's disease, starting to lose her mind when I was 17 or 18 and just having to suffer and slowly deteriorate down to nothing, over the next 4 or 5 years before she finally succumbed to it completely and went to the... I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional and angry every time I think about it. It's... I admit, some people have told me, now that I think about, they act like because I don't believe in heaven or hell anymore, in particular hell, that, I make it too easy on myself. I don't I'm trying to have like this all too friendly view of God and the rules he set forth for mankind, but it's actually doesn't really make things easier. Because now I have to face the reality of why death sucks, truly, for anybody. It's the great equalizer for everybody, and I apologize. Every time I think about that again, especially how it took my grandmother, I become rather cynical and kind of angry sounding. I know. I apologize. And it's not like I'm the only one. I don't mean to make it sound like I'm the only one who's ever experienced loss to death either. I mean, everybody has lost at least one person, if not several, people that they're close to. Friends, family, wives, husbands, children, to death. It's just a natural, sucky part of life. But, now that I'm past all that, I just wanted to make this about... I want to dedicate this reading to Dolores, my grandmother, because it's thanks to her. It's basically thanks to her that I even had the love of reading that I do, especially as a child. It's thanks to her that I discovered James Howe's, terrific writing in the Bunnicula books. And I have so many precious memories of her that revolve around reading these books. And so I want to dedicate this next reading of Nighty-Nightmare to her, because this is the first book she brought to me as a gift. And it turns out that even not considering the sentimental value, it's actually my favorite in the Bunnicula series, aside from probably the fifth book, the next one coming up after this. Because Nighty-Nightmare, I think I brought this up briefly before. Maybe in the comments of in the information section of the last video, as I was finishing up the celery stalks at midnight. This Nighty-Nightmare kind of established like a legend behind Bunnicula, a mythos. His origins, how he became a vampire. And it kind of makes me wonder if it's actually supposed to be, for all though this movie is kind of supposed to be like a spoof of anything scary at all, any horror aspect you might somehow find in these books. It's like this book is spoofing it, because of course all the things that Chester suspects, the evil goings on, they never turn out to be true. I mean, or at least exactly what it was that he was thinking, and there was no true danger to anybody, But I always wonder if in this book it was actually meant to be true, that somehow the person telling us the story of Bunnicula here, establishing the legend of this curious vampire rabbit, the dark origins that he came from, to kind of, it makes it sound so epic, if they're actually supposed to be true. Of course, it turns out that Bunnicula doesn't actually, do what you normally expect vampires to do. He doesn't turn people into undead by sucking out their blood, but he does have vampire-like qualities, And it was just a really entertaining part of the book, and it's really the reason this legend of Bunnicula that is established in Nighty-Nightmare, it's really what drives it over the top to be pretty much better, other than possibly tied with the next book in the series, the best of all of them, of all 7 books. And this is for you, Grandma. Thank you for all... Thank you for the love you've shown to me, my sister, and especially when it was just us, before my cousins came along and you had 4 grandchildren instead of 2. And I remember fearing that your love would be divided, as a kid, as a little kid, 10 years old, I believe, I remember fearing that your love would be further divided, but no, it's somehow only increased. And you still dedicated more than enough time to each of us. And I can only pray that while you may be in the grave now and not up in heaven, right this moment, like most believe, not until a later date when we're all brought back to life, because that's what my entire faith is based on, that we have a chance at life again sometime in the future because of Jesus Christ. While you may be asleep now, I hope that somehow you're hearing this. That you're hearing me read this book aloud to who knows how many people will eventually be listening. I can only pray a lot of them. As you first read the book to me, and I read it to you, aloud to you. So, this is for my grandmother Dolores, and for all of you listening. I hope you're just as entertained by this book when I get to reading it in the next video as I am. And finally, thank you, James Howe. Thank you again for having written what you have. I can only assume that just as it was by God's will, perhaps, that my grandmother knew just the right book to bring to me as her first gift that came in the form of a book, that it was Nighty-Nightmare. I can also only imagine that it was God's will that you, James Howe, would become the person that you did, who would be able to write books such as these that would capture the fantasies and imaginations, just cause them to soar in in the minds of who knows how many children everywhere. So thank you again. And for all of you listening, I will see you in the next video, starting with chapter 1. Good night.